Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're opening up some genuinely revolutionary source material. We're tackling a question that's, well, it's dogged humanity forever, hasn't it? What does it actually take to turn a group that's fragmented, maybe marginalized, even persecuted, into something truly unified, a functional society built on, well, justice?
It's a massive question, and the sources we're looking at today provide a unique blueprint.
Exactly. We're doing a deep dive into the model established right after the Hijra, that pivotal migration in early Islam. It's about community building, but rooted in some pretty radical ideas of justice and compassion.
And it's not just ancient history, you could argue. It's, well, organizational design at its most profound.
That's the angle. Our mission for you, listening in, is really practical today. We want to get past just the story, the narrative, and actually pull out the core mechanisms. What was the social architecture, the economic framework? How did they manage that shift from just surviving, dealing with tribal conflicts, to actually setting a new standard for institutional justice?
What were those nuts and bolts?
Right. We want the principles, the actionable insights you could potentially apply today, whether you're building a community group, a company, or even thinking about ethics in, say, digital spaces.
And that framework, it leads us straight to the core questions that jump out from the sources. I mean, think about the challenge Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, faced. It was just immense. How do you take these two very different groups, the Muhājirīn, the migrants from Mecca who'd been persecuted, lost everything,
Fully displaced.
and then the Ansār, the helpers in Medina, who were themselves made up of tribes that had been fighting each other for generations? How do you not just get them to tolerate each other, but actually fuse them
Into one single community.
one community,
Yeah.
and one built on justice and compassion, no less? So what were the unique elements? What specifically about this ukhuwa, this brotherhood they established, made that immediate integration possible? It was almost unprecedented, the level of sharing, both material and emotional.
And our analysis, looking at the sources, suggests it didn't start with rule books or decrees.
No, not at all. It began with something much more fundamental: engineered belonging.
Okay, let's unpack that. Engineered belonging, because the sources are really clear on this, aren't they? The foundation wasn't laws first. It wasn't bureaucracy. It was this deep, deliberate sense of mutual dependence, of truly belonging together. And maybe we should start with the context, because the Hijra, that move from Mecca to Medina, it wasn't just changing locations on a map.
Absolutely critical context. It represented a complete shift in condition.
Right. In Mecca, for over a decade, it was about persecution, secrecy, sometimes just pure survival for the early Muslims.
Constantly under threat.
Then they arrive in Medina. Suddenly there's space, there's relative safety, political autonomy they never had before. It was the first real chance to build the kind of society they envisioned.
A blank slate, in a way. An opportunity. And this is where we see the first key leadership insight from the sources, something modern management often gets backwards, I think. Priority setting. The Prophet, peace be upon him, focused first on the human element, on uniting hearts, on resolving old conflicts between the Madinah tribes, the Aus and Khazraj, on creating a shared emotional identity before he moved on to the Constitution, the treaties, the laws.
So people before paper.
Essentially, yes. Think about their psychological state. The Muhājirīn arrived destitute, traumatized maybe, having lost status, family, wealth.
Everything.
And the Ansār, as we said, their identity was wrapped up in tribes with long histories of, frankly, a bloody conflict between them. Imagine trying to impose a complex legal structure on people in that state.
It would fracture immediately. People would revert to their old loyalties under pressure.
Exactly. It would have likely caused rebellion or just collapse. The loyalty wasn't there yet for this new overarching structure.
So it's like the difference between forcing people to comply versus cultivating real commitment.
Yeah.
You put the rules first before the culture is ready, and the rules feel alien imposed.
An external constraint.
Right. But if you first build that shared why, that common destiny, that feeling of we're in this together, then people want the structure. They see the rules as necessary to protect the community they now value.
That's the core lesson here. Real community starts with belonging, not bureaucracy. This initial phase, before the famous Constitution of Madinah, was all about forging that shared covenant. It was a deliberate psychological effort.
How so?
By shifting the primary locus of loyalty, moving it away from the narrow confines of blood relations and tribal identity towards this much broader identity of the Ummah, the community of believers.
So you build the emotional buy-in first.
You ensure that deep emotional commitment, that sense of mutual dependence, and that becomes the fertile ground. Once that's established, you can build the institutional frameworks, the laws, the economic systems on top of it.
It's kind of an inversion of how we often think about state building, isn't it? Usually it's impose order, then hope culture follows.
This was culture first, order second, or
Yeah.
perhaps culture enabling order.
Okay, so belonging is the foundation. But they needed to stabilize things quickly. The Muhājirīn needed immediate help. The Ansār needed to integrate them. What was the first big practical step they took to make that belonging real and start replacing the old tribal system?
Right, that leads us to the next stage, which was, well, you could almost call it social shock therapy. It was immediate, systemic, and incredibly practical. The Pact of Brotherhood, the Ukhuwah.
This is where the prophet paired people up.
Exactly. He understood that just letting people mingle wouldn't be enough. Integration needed a push, a structure. So he systematically paired each migrant, each muhajir arriving with nothing, with a specific local helper, an Ansari.
And this wasn't just like, hey, meet your buddy.
Oh, far from it. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was a binding partnership, deeply enforced. It was a deliberate fusion of their economic lives, their domestic lives.
We really need to pause here because the sources emphasize just how radical this was. You said binding. What did that actually mean for the Ansār, the established residents?
It meant real material consequences, often quite demanding ones. This brotherhood, this ukhuwah, explicitly included sharing wealth, sharing homes, taking on genuine responsibility for the other person's welfare.
Sharing homes, like literally moving people in.
In many cases, yes, sharing resources. To give you an idea of how serious this was, initially, the legal framework was adjusted so that these paired brothers could inherit from each other.
Wow. Inherit. Ahead of blood relatives.
Initially, yes. That specific inheritance rule was later superseded by Quranic verses clarifying inheritance laws based on kinship. But the fact it was even instituted temporarily shows the gravity of this pact. It wasn't casual. The Ansār were being asked to help their new brothers and sisters restart life completely from scratch.
That level of demand is just extraordinary. I mean, think about it today. If a leader asked half their team to give half their salary and half their house space to newcomers.
There'd be outrage, right?
Yeah.
Immediate revolt.
So this raises a key question. Did the sources talk about the resistance, the cultural shock this must have caused among the Ansār? Was everyone just instantly on board with this massive sacrifice?
That's a really important point. The sources focus more on the success and the spirit of generosity, but they imply the immense personal sacrifice involved. It wasn't easy. It required overcoming generations of tribal thinking and, frankly, basic self-interest. What made it possible was the strength of their shared faith and the loyalty to the Prophet's leadership, which overrode those older ties. This wasn't cheap grace, it was costly commitment.
Okay, so it wasn't frictionless, but the commitment held because of the deeper why.
Precisely. And the perfect illustration of this commitment, the anecdote that really brings home the depth of it, is the story of Sa'd ibn Rabi. He was one of the Ansār.
Right, he was paired with, was it Abdurrahman?
Often cited as Abdurrahman ibn Auf, yes, one of the Muhājirīn. And Sa'd's offer wasn't just, here's a bit of help. It was fundamentally life-altering.
Okay, tell us the details again, because this story really captures the essence of Ukhuwah.
Sayyid basically said, look, I'm one of the wealthiest among the Ansār. I will literally split everything I own in half for you.
Half?
Half? Half his wealth, half his property, likely orchards or farms. But then he went even further. He said, I also have 2 wives. Look and see which of them is more pleasing to you, and I will divorce her so that you can marry her.
Wait, he offered to dissolve his own marriage for his designated brother.
Yes. Think about that. It moves beyond financial generosity into sacrificing the most personal aspects of life, family structure, relationships. It underlines that this wasn't just charity.
No, charity is giving from your surplus. This is restructuring your entire life for someone else.
That's the crucial distinction. Charity often maintains a power dynamic, right? Giver and receiver. But ukhuwah, as envisioned and practiced here, was designed to eliminate that hierarchy immediately. It was meant to instantly elevate the destitute migrant to a status of equal kinship, equal access.
It's a covenant of mutual responsibility, not a handout.
Exactly. Now, the sources also record Abdurrahman ibn Auf's response, which is equally remarkable in its own way. He politely declined the most radical parts of the offer.
He didn't take the wife or half the wealth.
No. He said, essentially, may God bless you and your family and your wealth. Just show me the way to the marketplace. He wanted the opportunity to work and build his own wealth, which he very successfully did.
That's an important part of the story, too. Dignity through opportunity, not just dependence.
Absolutely. But the offer from Saad, that's what sets the standard. That's what defines the depth of the commitment expected. It establishes this non-negotiable principle: real community requires real sacrifice.
So the leadership insight here, pulled from the sources, is pretty stark. True community, true brotherhood can't be built on convenience alone.
It requires sacrifice beyond convenience. If the commitment doesn't actually cost the established members something significant, their time, their comfort, their wealth, then that bond probably isn't strong enough to weather real challenges.
It ensured the Ansar had skin in the game. Their own well-being was now tied to the well-being of the Muhājirīn. It cemented their commitment to this new, unified structure.
It was the practical application of that engineered belonging we talked about earlier.
Okay, so they established this incredible foundation. Radical belonging, cemented by the Yuku, this pact of sacrificial brotherhood. They had the cultural glue, the emotional buy-in.
A very strong glue.
But as you said, emotional bonds can sometimes fade, right? Initial enthusiasm can wane. How did they make sure this unity wasn't just a temporary response to a crisis? How did they make it last?
That's where the institutional framework becomes crucial. And the sources point unequivocally to one core principle: justice. This became the spine, the structural support ensuring the community's long-term stability.
And this was formalized in the Constitution of Madinah.
Exactly. They moved from personal commitment, the ukhuwa, to systemic reliability. The Constitution of Madinah, or the Sayafat al-Madinah, wasn't just some internal document for Muslims. That's key.
What was it then?
It was essentially a treaty, a formal agreement establishing a political entity, a city-state, that included not just the Muhājirīn and the Ansār, but also the various Jewish tribes residing in Medina and other non-Muslim groups. It was fundamentally a multi-faith social contract.
A multi-faith contract in 7th century Arabia. That sounds revolutionary.
It absolutely was. It established an alliance, a mutual protection pact, but critically, it laid down principles of justice that were meant to apply across these diverse groups.
So this wasn't just about keeping the Muslims united, but creating a just society for everyone living there.
That was the framework. The Constitution explicitly aimed to override the centuries of tribal law, where justice was often based on power, wealth, or who you knew. It mandated equality before the law.
How did that work in practice?
The principle was clear. No single tribe, no race, no class, whether based on wealth or lineage, was to be considered above the law or privileged within this system. Every group, including the Jewish tribes, had defined rights like internal religious autonomy, but also defined responsibilities, particularly concerning the shared defense of Medina and adherence to a common standard of justice in disputes between groups.
Okay, establishing that principle is one thing. But Medina was diverse, with deep-seated tribal histories. How did they actually enforce such a high, unifying standard, especially when it might conflict with someone's tribal loyalty?
This is where the spiritual dimension becomes inseparable from the political. To ensure this wasn't just diplomatic language, the underlying moral instruction for the community, especially the Muslims who formed the core, was absolutely uncompromising. This is what prevented it from being mere political maneuvering.
You mean Quranic guidance?
Yes. The specific instruction, quoted often in the source material analyzing this period, elevated justice above everything else, above personal ties, tribal loyalty, even self-interest. The verse states, and this is from Surah An-Nisa, verse 135, "O you who have believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves or parents and relatives."
Even against yourselves or your kin. That phrase is incredibly powerful.
It's the ultimate safeguard against bias. Think about the tribal system it was replacing. For millennia, if someone from your tribe committed a crime, your first instinct, your duty, was to protect them, right? Or the whole tribe might face repercussions. Justice was collective, biased, transactional.
Loyalty trumped objective truth.
Absolutely. This verse and the legal system built around it flips that entirely. It makes justice an individual moral responsibility that transcends blood ties. If your own father or your son or even you yourself are in the wrong, justice must still be served impartially. It intentionally cuts through that natural human tendency towards favoritism.
So the implication for unity is massive. If your community's unity is just based on shared feeling, or us versus them, it breaks the moment someone from your in-group does something wrong.
You're forced to choose loyalty or justice. And if you choose loyalty, the system loses credibility, resentment builds, and it eventually fractures.
But if you anchor the unity in this unwavering, absolute commitment to impartial justice.
Then the structure holds. It becomes self-correcting. People trust the system because they know the rules apply equally to everyone, regardless of status or connection. Justice becomes the reliable institutional foundation that sustains the more personal bond of brotherhood.
So justice isn't just a virtue here. It's presented as a strategic necessity for resilience.
Exactly. It's the tool that makes the whole thing work long-term. Without that institutional guarantee of fairness, the sacrifice demanded by ukhuwa would eventually feel exploitative and the unity would dissolve.
Okay, so we have brotherhood providing the initial bond and justice providing the lasting structure.
Yeah.
But, the real test of any justice system, then or now, is how it actually treats the people at the bottom, the most vulnerable.
That's a crucial point. And the sources emphasize that this prophetic model wasn't just about passive non-discrimination, like, we won't treat people unfairly. It went further. It was about proactive upliftment.
Deliberately raising up those who had been pushed down.
Precisely. The establishment of this new community in Medina was seen as an opportunity, maybe even a duty, to actively correct long-standing injustices. The focus wasn't just on integrating the Muhājirīn migrants, but also on elevating the status of the poor, the orphans, and particularly individuals who were formerly enslaved.
People who, in the old tribal system, were often seen as property or having no real social standing.
Exactly. And the key mechanism here, besides the economic support we'll touch on, was the fundamental shift in what determined a person's value. The old metrics birth, wealth, tribal affiliation were deliberately replaced by new ones: faith, piety, competence, character. It was an introduction of meritocracy, but merit defined morally and ethically.
And this wasn't just about saying nice things, right? The sources stress that this provided real dignity and real opportunity, not just symbolic gestures.
No, absolutely not symbolic. It meant tangible changes in social status, political influence, and economic mobility that would have been unthinkable under the old tribal hierarchies.
Let's make this concrete. The source materials often highlight specific individuals whose lives exemplify this transformation. Who are some key examples?
Okay, probably the most famous is Bilal ibn Rabah. You need to understand his background. He was an Abyssinian, likely from modern-day Ethiopia or Eritrea. Critically, he was formerly enslaved.
So, bottom of the social ladder in pre-Islamic Arabia.
Absolutely. Yet, after embracing Islam and being freed, he wasn't just, accepted, he was elevated. He was chosen by the Prophet himself to be the first muezzin.
The person who calls the community to prayer 5 times a day.
Yes. And this was not a minor role. The muezzin's voice essentially set the rhythm of the entire city's daily life. It was a position of immense spiritual significance and public prominence. His voice, recognized and respected by everyone, not his race or former status, commanded attention. It was a powerful daily reminder of the new values.
Incredible. Who else?
Then consider Suhaib Rumi. His name literally means Suhaib the Roman.
So, not an Arab.
No, he was from Byzantine territory, an outsider with no tribal connections in Arabia. In the old system, he would have remained peripheral. But in Medina, he was fully integrated, considered one of the foremost companions. His foreign origin was irrelevant compared to his faith and character. It showed the Ummah identity superseding nationality or ethnicity.
Okay, so we have a former slave in a key spiritual role, a foreigner fully integrated. Anyone else who highlights this?
Yes, the story of Salman al-Farsi, Salman the Persian, is perhaps even more striking in some ways.
Persian, so another outsider.
A complete outsider. The sources detail his long, arduous journey across empires and religions seeking truth. He eventually reaches Medina. He has no tribe, no wealth, no connections, yet he becomes one of the Prophet's closest confidants and advisors.
And wasn't he involved in a major military strategy?
Famously so. During the siege of Medina, the Battle of the Trench, or Khandak, it was Salman who suggested digging a large defensive trench around the exposed parts of the city, a military tactic known in Persia but unfamiliar to the Arabs.
And they adopted it.
They did, and it proved decisive in defending the city. Think about the implication. A foreigner with no traditional standing was trusted enough that his strategic advice shaped the entire community's defense plan. His competence and wisdom mattered more than his origin.
So the elevation of Bilal, Suhaib, Salman, it wasn't accidental. It was the system working as intended.
Exactly. It was a living demonstration that a person's worth came from their character, their faith, their contribution, not their background. It systematically dismantled the old hierarchies. A former slave could hold spiritual authority. A foreigner could hold strategic military importance.
And the connection to today feels really direct here. Any community, Any organization, physical or online, that systematically excludes or ignores the marginalized. It's not just unjust, it's shooting itself in the foot, isn't it?
It absolutely is. That exclusion creates instability. It breeds resentment. And as the example of Solomon shows, it actively deprives the community of valuable talent, different perspectives, crucial insights. The sources suggest the prophetic model understood this profoundly. Integrating the marginalized wasn't just charity or kindness. It was essential for the strength, resilience, and dynamism of the whole society. Okay, so we've got brotherhood as the glue, justice as the spine, inclusion as the practice. But none of that holds together long term if the economic system is fundamentally unfair.
Right. You can't preach brotherhood and equality if the economy is designed to make a few people rich while keeping others poor. Resentment will eventually tear it apart.
Precisely. So the Madinah model, as detailed in the sources, didn't just leave the economy to chance. It actively structured the marketplace to promote fairness and counter the concentration of wealth.
This wasn't a laissez-faire approach then.
Definitely not. When the market was established in Medina, it wasn't just, okay, everyone trade. There were clear ethical guidelines and regulations from the start. Fairness was built in.
What kinds of things were regulated? What specific behaviors were banned to protect that social contract we've been talking about?
Well, some were basic honesty standards, of
Yeah.
course, banning cheating and weights and measures, things like that, which were common problems. But it went deeper into systemic issues.
Such as?
Practices like itikar were prohibited. That's hoarding essential goods like food during times of scarcity to artificially drive up prices and exploit people's needs.
Market manipulation, essentially.
Yes. Also, najash, which is like artificially inflating bids at an auction to deceive genuine buyers or generally creating false demand. And perhaps most fundamentally, the prohibition of riba.
Riba is often translated as interest or usury. Why was that ban so significant economically?
Because riba, particularly in its exploitative forms, allows wealth to generate more wealth passively, often at the expense of those who need capital. It allows money itself to become a commodity that generates profit without necessarily involving productive work or shared risk. Banning it fundamentally altered the financial landscape.
How so?
It pushed the economy towards partnership and risk-sharing models like mudaraba, profit-sharing partnership, or musharaka, joint venture. It discouraged the passive accumulation of wealth through lending alone and protected debtors from spiraling, inescapable debt cycles. It was a major check on systemic inequality.
So the market rules aim to tie profit to real economic activity, real risk, real labor, and protect the vulnerable from exploitation.
That was the goal, to create a more level playing field, especially for small traders like Abdurrahman ibn Auf, who just needed access, not favors. But beyond just regulating negative behaviors, they also institutionalized positive economic action. Compassion became systemic.
And this is where zakat comes in.
This is zakat, and we need to be clear, zakat in this context wasn't just voluntary charity, which is called sadaqah and is also encouraged. Zakat was different.
That was different.
Zakat was a mandatory, structured obligation. It was essentially an institutionalized wealth tax, considered one of the pillars of Islam. It was levied annually on specific types of excess wealth savings: gold, silver, livestock, agricultural produce, trade goods that had been held above a certain minimum threshold, the nisab, for a year.
So a formalized system, not just relying on individual generosity.
Exactly. It formalized compassion. And its purpose, as described, was twofold. One, purifying the wealth of the person paying it. But two, and crucially for social structure, ensuring a guaranteed portion of the community's wealth flowed directly back to specific categories of recipients defined in the Quran.
Who were the recipients?
Primarily the poor and the needy, the collectors employed to administer the zakat, reconciling hearts, which could include new Muslims or allies, freeing captives or slaves, helping those burdened with debt, funding endeavors in the path of God, and assisting stranded travelers. It was a comprehensive social safety net funded by the community's wealth.
So zakat becomes this engine for wealth circulation. It stops wealth from just accumulating and stagnating in the hands of a few.
That's the key economic principle highlighted. Communities thrive and remain cohesive when wealth circulates, when it flows through the entire system, supporting the vulnerable, enabling participation, reducing despair and resentment. Hoarding wealth, concentrating it in a few hands, starves the economy, stifles opportunity, and directly contradicts the spirit of brotherhood.
Circulation sustains solidarity.
Absolutely. Zakat, combined with the market regulations like the ban on riba and hoarding, created an economic ecosystem designed to support the social goals of unity and justice.
And this is where the source material we reviewed draws a really sharp line to today, doesn't it? Explicitly connecting this historical model to our current anxieties about inequality, particularly driven by technology and AI.
It does. It poses a direct challenge. We're living through a period of incredible technological change, creating immense new forms of digital wealth, but it's also creating, or at least exacerbating, massive inequality. Power, capital, data, it's concentrating in the hands of a very small number of individuals and corporations who own the platforms, control the algorithms, develop the AI.
The digital landlords, in a way?
You could say that.
Yeah.
And the reflection in the sources is that this trend, this tech-driven inequality, can't just be accepted as inevitable. It has to be actively addressed using principles analogous to the Madinah model. Meaning, we need to be thinking deliberately about fair distribution, about access, about preventing digital monopolies and exploitation. How do we ensure the benefits of AI and digital platforms are shared more broadly? How do we prevent algorithms from reinforcing existing biases or creating new forms of exclusion? The historical lesson is that you have to design the system for fairness. It doesn't happen automatically.
So the blueprint argues that whether the economy is based on goat herds and date palms or on data streams and algorithms, the fundamental ethical requirement remains the same. Build systems that promote circulation, ensure fairness, and protect the community from the powerful centralizing forces of unchecked wealth and technology.
That's the enduring challenge presented. And what's really fascinating when you step back is how these principles forged in a specific historical context, dealing with physical proximity and tangible goods, still resonate so strongly today. The core values seem timeless.
Trust, fairness, inclusion.
Exactly. They seem to be fundamental requirements for any healthy, functioning human community, regardless of the era or the technology.
Which brings us to the challenge of applying this to our modern lives, so much of which is now lived online. We have online communities, social media platforms, remote work teams, digital organizations.
We inhabit these digital spaces constantly.
But often these spaces feel, well, fragile, sometimes toxic. They struggle to build that deep sense of solidarity and resilience we saw in the Madinah example. Unity feels superficial, often based on shallow metrics, likes, follower counts, retweets.
And that's the precise challenge the sources raise for contemporary leaders. Whether you're running a multinational corporation with remote teams or designing the next social media app, the call is to foster what the source material terms digital brotherhood.
Digital brotherhood.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that mean in practice? It can't mean sharing your house with a Twitter follower.
No, of course not. But the principle behind ukhuwah, that commitment requires tangible sacrifice and responsibility, needs translation. It means moving beyond those superficial metrics you mentioned.
So if the original brotherhood demanded sharing wealth and homes, what's the equivalent sacrifice or commitment in the digital realm?
Maybe it's about sharing your platform, your influence, your attention. It could mean actively defending people from marginalized groups who face online harassment and abuse, even if it costs you followers or engagement.
Pushing back against the algorithms that often reward conflict and outrage.
Precisely. It means consciously working to make digital spaces less like echo chambers for the powerful or the loudest, and more genuinely inclusive. Ensuring that access and opportunity within these digital communities aren't just for the already privileged.
And it also implies needing that institutional justice component online too, doesn't it? Like the Constitution of Madinah provided the structure.
Absolutely critical. Digital brotherhood without digital justice is just sentiment. It requires fair, transparent, and consistently applied rules of conduct moderation policies that aren't biased. It means platform governance that actively protects vulnerable users and ensures some level of equitable access, preventing digital ghettos or unchecked exploitation.
So we need the digital equivalent of justice, even against yourselves or your kin. If a high-profile user or even someone connected to the platform's owners breaks the rules.
Justice must still apply impartially. That's the only way to build genuine trust and prevent the digital community from fracturing under the inevitable pressures of conflict and differing viewpoints. Without that trust and fairness, the community is just a network waiting to dissolve.
So if the historical ukhuwah required sharing tangible resources, maybe digital brotherhood requires sharing attention, amplifying marginalized voices, ensuring equitable access, and actively defending others from harm online.
That's a good way to frame it. The medium changes, but the underlying need for both personal commitment, brotherhood, and systemic fairness, justice, remains.
Okay, so bringing this entire deep dive together, synthesizing the analysis from the sources, We land on a core formula, it seems.
It does feel like a formula emerges. Brotherhood understood as profound, sacrificial belonging engineered from the start, combined with justice, institutionalized, impartial fairness that ensures inclusion and economic circulation.
That combination provides a timeless recipe for social transformation. It worked for building a cohesive, multi-faith city-state from scratch 14 centuries ago.
And the principles, the sources argue, are just as relevant, whether you're building a neighborhood association, a global company, or an online platform today. Brotherhood plus justice equals transformation. Hashtag outro.
Wow. That was incredibly dense, but also really illuminating. A deep dive into a historical blueprint that feels remarkably relevant. Let's just quickly crystallize the key takeaways for you, the listener, especially thinking about how you might apply these ideas. First, remember that strong community doesn't just happen. It has to be intentionally built on a foundation of genuine belonging, demanding commitment that goes beyond mere convenience, that UCOA principle.
Real skin in the game.
Second, justice isn't optional. It's the structural spine. Proactive inclusion and impartial fairness are what make unity last, far more reliably than just shared feelings or temporary enthusiasm.
Justice sustains what Brotherhood starts.
And third, economic fairness matters profoundly. Systems need to be designed to ensure resources circulate, preventing hoarding and exploitation, because economic solidarity underpins social solidarity.
You can't separate the two.
So, reflecting on all this,
Yeah.
the challenge laid down by the sources for anyone in a position of leadership or influence today seems pretty clear.
It's undeniable, really. The challenge is to stop treating these principles, sacrificial sharing, unwavering justice, proactive inclusion, as just nice ideals. It's about embedding them into the actual systems you design and manage.
Looking at the org charts, the policies, the algorithms.
Exactly. Are these principles reflected in the code, in the HR manual, in the community guidelines, in how resources are actually distributed? That's the hard work.
So perhaps a final thought to leave you with, something provocative to mull over, drawn directly from that call to audit our own practices based on the UCOA model.
Take a moment, maybe later today, and genuinely audit the communities or organizations you're part of. Whether it's your workplace, your online group, your neighborhood, ask yourself honestly, who is currently marginalized here? Who is excluded, overlooked, or economically vulnerable within this specific system?
Not in society generally, but right here in this space.
Right here. And then ask, what is one deliberate, practical action, maybe even one that requires a small sacrifice, mirroring that spirit of the Ansār that I could take or advocate for starting today to ensure that person or group experiences more dignified inclusion and more equitable access?
It doesn't have to be world-changing on day one.
No. Just start with one concrete act of practical justice, one step towards bridging that gap. Because the lesson from Medina seems to be that it's those tangible acts built on a foundation of genuine commitment that begin to truly transform a community from the inside out.